All right, so the story is this. The Burgundy Line, the pub, which has been in Little Burgundy for, I think, close to 20 years, receives a visit from an OQLF inspector. And by the way, they were last, I think, in the news for this in 2016. So for those of you familiar with TripAdvisor, the website, they had a little sticker on their window like, recommended by TripAdvisor. They actually got in trouble for that, too, this tiny little sticker. Well, this time, a little bit more serious, I guess. Toby Lyle, one of the owners of the Burgundy Line, was on with Elias Makos earlier this morning. And Elias began by asking, first of all, to explain the situation, that visit, and what happened.
This actually goes back about 2 years ago where we got a notice that we had to fill in the documentation for our certificat de francisation. And then it all went cold. We didn't hear anything about it. And then finally we got an email, about 6 weeks ago, saying that we had to go through a sort of an audit of our practices, our language practices here at Burgundy Lion. I sat with the OQLF inspector. We had a meeting at the pub. And yeah, he came in. He went over some issues he had. Some of them I wasn't unaware of, and most of them, honestly, I'm happy that he pointed out. There was like a couple words on our website that weren't bilingual; they were just in English, and those have all been corrected. And then he sent me a report. One of the things on the report being that the sign was not acceptable and needed more French on it. I sent him a response. He was on vacation, of course, for 2 weeks, and I just got his response back to that.
Have they told you what kind of changes you could make to satisfy, Bill 96 and the new requirements?
Yeah, I mean, it's they want more French on the sign, whatever that may be. Just more French words on the like I said, 17-year-old original sign of the Burgundy Lion pub. For now, I'm not changing the sign. That's for sure. We're gonna fight against this a bit. My sign doesn't say Burgundy Lion pub. It does say pub Burgundy Lion. It always has. Lion, of course, could be Lyon. Burgundy, in my opinion, the neighborhood is known as Little Burgundy to the locals, right? I know that technically on paper it's called Petit Bourgogne, but it's known by the local population that's been living here for 100 years as Little Burgundy. The pub is fine. The Lyon is obviously fine. It's the word Burgundy, which I maintain is a place name, and it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, here we go again. Bothered by the word Burgundy in pub Burgundy Lion. But then something rather interesting happened that you might not have thought would involve the OQLF. Listen to what this is. This is Toby Lyle again explaining what this inspector said to him.
That was just in conversation, but it started our meeting on a very, very sour note. He started by asking me how I pronounce my name, and I told him it's Lyle. He said, "Oh, that's not a Quebecois name. Where are you from?" Jeez. And I said, "Well, listen, my family's from the UK, but I was born in Montreal, so it's a Quebecois name." And then he said, "Oh, well, my name, I can't remember his last name, but it was, I won't bring it up, but it was he had a Polish last name." So, "Well, I'm not Quebecois. My last name's Polish." And I asked him where he was born, and he said Montreal. I said, "Well, guess what? You're Quebecois, my friend."
Jeez. What would an OQLF? I mean, why would that even come up in a conversation? What right does someone from the OQLF, an inspector, have to even bring that up? The other issue that's going on here is the fact that he has decided, Toby Lyle from the Burgundy Line, to go public with this. He put it up on his Facebook page. People, of course, weighed in. I want to try to understand what happens next because, as I said, before we started here, many people who are faced with a situation like this, visited by an OQLF inspector, decide to say nothing, do nothing, just go ahead, pay the fine or do whatever else and not to fight. So what happens in this case? Eliane Ellbogen is a lawyer and trademark agent at Fasken Montreal. She is on the line. Thank you so much for being here. You're familiar with the story. You know what's going on. You have someone here who was visited by an OQLF inspector. I want to ask just off the top, this idea of what's your last name? That's not a Quebecois name. What is that about? Can you even go ahead and ask that of someone?
Well, that's a great question. And I mean, frankly, that an OQLF inspector would ask that. It's completely sort of superfluous and extraneous to whatever investigation they might have been doing. Probably it was maybe conversational. It was probably a little bit, I would say, awkward of them to do so, inappropriate probably, but no, it doesn't really stem from their, legal mandate to investigate or inquire as to business practice.
All right. Yeah. Weird indeed. I think that might be a fair word to use. So let me ask the question then. Here you go. Situation where they're told they have to change because apparently pub Burgundy Line the word Burgundy is somehow offensive or doesn't necessarily fit the bill as far as the language laws are concerned. You have someone here saying, look, it's been this way for 17 years. It's never been a problem before. And I think his words were, we're going to go ahead and fight this for now. What does he do going forward, and is it worth fighting this?
Well, first off, what I'd say is that the reason that right now they're looking into this is that there was an amendment to the French language charter which came into effect in June, which now requires that on public signs, public exterior signs, that non-French words be accompanied by French generic words that must occupy twice as much visual space as the non-French words. So that's where that's coming from. There was a before and an after. Before, this would have been allowed. Now, it's no longer allowed. So that's number one. Number two is, they can fight back for sure. There was a lot of pushback in the years leading up to these amendments. A lot of businesses, a lot of trade associations voiced their concerns. They were opposed to this amendment in particular, saying that it was completely unreasonable to require that, French generic terms appear twice as big as a business name, which often is a trademark. A lot of businesses were saying that this goes against trademark rights. That's a really, that's a valid argument from a legal standpoint.
So if he argues that, it's a trademark, it's not just the word Burgundy, does he get left alone? How does this necessarily play through?
So not quite. So even if it's a recognized trademark, which in this case, I think, you could make the argument that it's a recognized trademark, Burgundy Lion. Even so, what that gives you is an exemption from having to translate the terms themselves. So otherwise, if it wasn't a trademark, he'd have to translate the word Burgundy. That being so, he still has to accompany the non-French trademark by French generic terms like restaurant, gastronomie, pub anglais, I don't know, those generic terms have to appear and they have to be twice as large as the non-French trademark.
But the word pub, is that an acceptable French word? Pub?
To be perfectly honest, I'd have to look it up in the French dictionary. It might be, but there are, the OQLF takes a very aggressive stance on Anglicisms. So, look, I wouldn't be able to say right now, but potentially it could be acceptable or not.
Okay. I mean, if he made it taverne, which is a French word, right?
Yeah, taverne would be acceptable for sure.
Okay. What would your advice, not that you're, representing him, I want to make that clear. I'm just looking for some generic advice. What would you say to someone like this in the situation that he's in?
I'd say there are some exceptions that are available. We'd have to look at, for example, a geographic name doesn't have to be translated. So potentially there's an argument to be made that Little Burgundy is a place name. It's a recognized place name in Quebec. There are other potential exceptions that could apply. Maybe not necessarily in this case, but generally speaking, in terms of exterior public signage, there are some exceptions.
Okay.
Now, once, they're not yet at the point where an official order from the OQLF has been issued, but if and when they get to that point, they can contest it. So there are some arguments to be raised, and I've spoken about this in the past, that there are really strong arguments to be made that there's potentially a constitutional aspect to it, where we have a provincial law that is potentially conflicting with federal trademarks law. So there's a constitutional aspect there that could be raised as well.
Okay. Well, we shall see. Maybe, as they like to, sometimes we say, cooler heads will prevail. Let's hope the government does, in fact, now that this thing has gone public, maybe choose to back off, although maybe that's unrealistic. Eliane, thank you so much. I do appreciate the time.
You're welcome.